6:30 p.m. I will call to order the regular board meeting for Tuesday, January 22nd, Fargo Board of Education. Thanks for being here. Could I have a motion, please, for approval of the agenda?
So moved with the HR addendum.
All right, there's been an a motion for approval with the HR addendum. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying yes.
Yes.
Opposed? Motion passes. Recognition of audience. We do have audience members here this evening, but no one has signed up to speak to us, so we will move on to staff reports. Our first report is the FEA report. Welcome, Laura.
It's probably definitely good evening by now because you've been in meetings for a while now together, right? Late to the party once again. Here we go. I've got a couple schools representing tonight. First of all, from McKinley. A couple of things they wanted to point out going on cool at McKinley. They're really proud of the success they're having with student-centered coaching. And the school climate is positive, which has, as you would imagine, a great impact on students and their learning. And we also have Centennial in the house. At Centennial, they're working hard in learning and using AVMR data, and I double-checked, I'm not supposed to say AVMR. AVMR data and small group activities this year. Most of the primary teachers have been trained in both AVMR 1 and 2. 3rd through 5th grade teachers are trained in course 1 and will get course 2 next year, using learning walks for AVMR small group math coaching at Centennial. And that's my report for this evening.
All right, thank you, Laura. Moving on to staff reports, item B, standards-based program scorecard. Dr. Gross, you are going to make introductions?
Yes, thank you very much. In our strategic plan, strategic initiative number 1 is student achievement and growth. And underneath that, we have a goal, which is goal number 2, around standards-based education. And I'm excited that tonight we get to share some of the things that we are doing across the system to help us get closer and closer to that goal. Tonight, Jodelle Teichen, who is our Director of Standards-Based Education, is here to share some of the exciting things that we've been doing with our staff to help us get to that goal. So I'll turn it over to Jodelle.
Thank you. So thank you for taking a few minutes to think about the work we've been doing around Strategic Initiative 1. I missed a meeting, so I think that's why I was elected to share it. I was just, as I'm listening to you and thinking, oh, I have actually all of these 6 goals that I was thinking about, so we'll try to keep it targeted at standards-based education. So why standards-based learning? I thought I'd just start there. And really, you know, this is a movement that's happened long time ago because of what the world's demanding of us in education, to really provide a workforce that can meet the needs of our workforce. And, you know, years ago, that workforce really wasn't needing to, not everybody had to have a high level of skill. And so there were lots and lots of jobs available that were kind of just repetitive tasks and didn't require some of the skills that our workforce demands today. And so in that shift, probably No Child Left Behind kind of time frame, that early 2000s, really all schools were called to get as many students as possible to achieve those standards, or in the light of that law, all students. And so that shift from norm-referenced assessments, where we would have a natural bell curve, some kids get it, some kids don't, really went to criterion-referenced, where there's a bar and we want them all to hit it. And so really working at, you know, what does that mean in a system where we know no two kids are created equal. And so working on how to make that happen for all the students in Fargo Public Schools. And we've been at this for a long time. So I actually just pulled the title slide from our admin retreat back in August of 2014, where this is where we shared with our principals, our administrators, really our long-range plan for teaching and learning that involved all the things you're going to listen to and hear about where we're at today. So progress as of date. You might ask, why has it taken so long? And I sometimes ask, why is this taking so long? And I really think a big part of that is it's a huge system, of course, and so to get everybody on the same page even about what we're talking about when we say standards-based learning and standards-based outcomes, it takes time. And we all know that time is precious, and there's a lot of different demands on everybody every day. And so really thinking through, how do you do that in a way that you build capacity in the system? Because it isn't something that you flip the switch and say, okay, now go do this. I mean, it really is, this is hard work from people who are doing hard work every day. And so I think we've tried to take an approach where we're really building capacity in folks along the way versus saying, here's what you have to do, now go do it. Because we know that isn't, our jobs are too hard for that. That's not going to happen that way. We have to really want to do it and really understand why and how, and it's complicated. So the promises of a standards-based system, of course, are as many students as possible master those grade level and course expectations. And for us, those are the North Dakota standards and the 21st century skills. So as we've asked that question, what is it students need to know and be able to do? That's where we go to look for those lists. Another promise is that students are actively engaged and take responsibility for their learning. So that shift from the teacher owns the learning to the student owns the learning, and they really want to do it. Who couldn't buy into that? Of course, we'd love that. That's a hard get. And so again, time in practice on how do you do that? What are the strategies to do that? What do we need? And then a guaranteed and viable curriculum. Of course, we want, no matter where you build a house in Fargo, we'd like our students have access to the same high-quality, guaranteed, and viable curriculum. And so whether I'm taking biology at Davies or at North or at South, we want it to be that same course and with the same expected outcomes. And again, getting those folks together across the system and really getting everybody on the same page about what that means can be tough. And you might imagine that, okay, we don't always agree. And so it takes time to kind of work through that as well. So one of the things that we've been talking about is really looking at those lists. So that North Dakota standards document and our 21st century skills has a lot in it. And we know that at best, we have one calendar year with our students to achieve what we've decided is most essential. And so what this has looked like in the past is all the standards, right? So I actually, when we were doing this work, I counted them up. And so on this first grade progress report that our teachers are using today, or actually in the next month, they're going to be reporting on second trimester, has over 100 standards just in language arts that they're teaching, assessing, reporting. And you can add, 50 more in math and another few in science and social studies to an elementary plate, and then similar picture at the secondary. And so one of the tasks is really to say, well, what's viable? Because we know with the 21st century skills and the demands of our workers in terms of higher level thinking and application, we need to be able to get to application, and yet if we have this much content to cover, that's just not going to work. We need to narrow that list so that we can go deep in some topics that we might deem more important than others. And so that's really been our work, is to take all of those standards and all of those 21st century skills and say, what do we believe in this course or this grade level are the very most important things? And as you can imagine, doing that in isolation at one school or in one grade level isn't going to work, because we need to be able to pass the baton, right? And so particularly in our elementary schools where we have lots of transition, students moving around in our district, we want to make sure that they're getting, second grade outcomes at Lewis and Clark are the same as the second grade outcomes at Centennial, because they might be moving. And of course we want that for guaranteed and viable. So that's been challenging, to take that big long list of stuff and say what's most important. So the criteria that our teacher teams have used to do that are endurance, leverage, readiness, assessment, and teacher judgment. And so basically they've looked at every standard in their grade level or course and ranked based on this criteria, and whatever rose to the top with the most points were the ones that ended up being what we call ELOs, which are our essential learning outcomes. So again, taking that big list of standards and skills and saying what's most essential for this grade level or course. And that doesn't mean that we don't pay attention to the other standards. We still teach all the other standards. Sometimes those other standards are inherent in the ELOs because they're building blocks to get to the ELO. But we also recognize that we don't have all the time we'd like to have with all the students that might need that time to learn, to come to to become proficient. And so teachers will teach these standards, but they're not the ones that they really teach in depth. They're not the ones that they worry about going back to if kids didn't get them. Our ELOs really are the map for that. So who's been doing the work? This has been probably, I would say, in my opinion, one of the best things both for me and for the system in terms of our work in teaching and learning is working with our teacher leaders. So we have, in grades 6 through 12, a number of teachers who step forward to say, you know what, I'll be a leader in that work. And so they've been the ones who've really led the work with selecting those ELOs and now building proficiency scales, which you'll learn about in a minute. And then really working with their peers. And so during all of our professional development now that's a district level PD day, we are doing course alike or grade alike meetings, because that's really the rare time they might get to get all together and really talk through some of the things that they're working on in terms of the guaranteed and viable curriculum. What you see represented in the graph, I don't know if you've looked at this, but in our strategic plan dashboard, this is just our way of measuring our progress towards creating those guaranteed and viable courses. So selecting all those ELOs, having common assessments to measure the student outcomes, and then how we're using that. So I like to say the first two areas are kind of the binder on the shelf, and then are we using the binder? You know, how are we using that every day in our classrooms, in our professional learning community conversations, to really look at who's achieving these standards, and let's talk about how we can differentiate that to make sure everybody, as many students as possible, are achieving those goals. And proficiency scales, I'm going to take a little bit of time and have you listen to some teachers and students about this, because this is probably one of the more significant shifts, and might be new learning for some of you. It was new learning for me. And many of the members of my team and our teachers, I think, as we've looked at what is this and how do you use this in a classroom to get to some of those ends that we're hoping for in standards-based instruction. So there's a little video clip here I'm going to play of a teacher explaining what a proficiency scale is and how she uses it.
It worked like 50 times today.
This proficiency scale is for 2 of the ELOs that we're working on right now. So the ELO is listed as a 3. This is where we want all students to be proficient by the end of the unit. And right now we're at the beginning of the unit, so we're working on all of these level 2 content skills. These are all the I can statements that the students need to master before they can be proficient in what the ELO is asking them to do. And so this helps me make sure I'm targeting activities in all of these areas that will help students reach proficiency in the standard. And it also helps me differentiate the lessons. We are at the start of this unit, and so as you can see, most of my students are at a level 1.5. Each of them has a little water droplet with a secret number. And so as they learn throughout the unit, they will see their number move through the proficiency scale. And that's something they also track privately in their binders, but here's just a nice visual of the class and the whole team. And so we're at the beginning of the unit. Most kids are at a 1.5. They can do some of these level 2 content things, but they're not able to do all of them yet since we're still starting the unit. However, a few, when we pre-tested, were able to do these things, and one is already up here. So now it helps me differentiate my lessons. The majority of students still need direct instruction on the stepping stones to get to the standard. These students are ready to try to make and defend an investigation implementing these things. And up here, this student is ready for real-world application. And so they're developing a project where they can use all of these I-CANs in a real-world situation to bump them up to the level 4.
That's what a proficiency scale is, and kind of how the teacher uses that with students to really make that learning visible, that learning progression, where they're starting and where they're heading. And then you're gonna hear from a few students who are using these proficiency scales, what they like about them and what they think about them. Oops, sorry, maybe not.
I personally love proficiency scales. It's a really good way to evaluate yourself and figure out where you are and compared to like what's expected of you in the class and where you could be going in the future, and kind of an outline of the language and like figuring out like what's next. Like,
one of the best advantages about it is like you can see where you're headed in the future, and like that really helps you know like what the steps you need to take to get to there.
And it really helps the teacher gauge where her students are at, and overall and individually, so she knows where she needs to work on with her students.
And I think it helps motivate yourself to get to that level.
Okay, so specific to French, what are you doing with these in the classroom?
We're using like the proficiency scale here, and it ranges from novice low to advanced high, and each grade level is at like, sorry, not grade level, each French level is at like a different place on the scale. As sophomores, we're ranging between novice high and moving upwards to intermediate low, which is kind of like how you can work your way up the scale, and like each, like different levels are at intermediate high, or some French 1 classes are at like novice to novice.
Think you fit on here and why? Now the vocab, overall, so Abby, when we look at this, it says a 1.0, says with help, partial success at a 2.0. So what's a 2.0? Recognizing all key vocab and relating kinetic energy to the mass of objects and speed of objects. And then that 3 is going to be the same one as the learning target. So explain how motion is influenced by distance traveled in a given time period. So where do you think you fall on this?
I don't know, probably a 2.
A 2, and why?
I don't know, just because I probably wouldn't have been able to completely describe all that.
Okay, so maybe you want to even score yourself maybe at like a 1.5 then. You know some vocab, you just don't know all the vocab, right? And then just tell me why down here. And then we'll pre-assess before the exam again. So you just want to do this first question.
Okay.
Vocab will be optional for you, okay?
Okay.
There you go. So this one, this looks really good. So you're getting both level 2 questions correct, right?
Yeah.
So when we look at this, then you converted these correctly, meaning that you got both the level 3 questions right also, okay?
Okay.
When we look at this one now, it says we need to apply to get that 4 level to the real world, right? So you have the metric units in the real world because you're saying that people measure speed and time. But I think to get the full 4, you're gonna want to explain why are we using speed and time and distance? So give me a real world example of how people use this in their lives.
I'm not really sure.
It's okay, go back and I want you to think about it, okay?
All right.
Proficiency scale helps me learn because all of these I can statements shows me what I need to do on this 2.0 so I can get up to 2.5 and then do all these before I can get to 3.
The kind of things, like 3 is the thing that you really want to get at, and 4 is kind of like above average. But like we're all just like, everything's working towards 2 to 3, and 2 is really what's based on 3.
What do you like about using the scale?
I like this about using the scale is because everybody can like say I'm like on a 1.5 and my friend's like at 2. She can work on something different than me, so I won't like be trying to like learn too fast so I won't understand it, and she won't be going too like slow like where she's already learned it.
What do you like about using the scales?
I kind of like the friendly competition part of it, where it's like all the numbers down here and up here may want to try and catch up to number 16 up there, and just kind of a fun aspect.
What do you like about using this scale for your learning?
It's private in that people don't know where you are. So if you were at like 0.5, then they wouldn't know who that is. And you get a secret number so you know. We each get a secret number that only we know, and then we can track our learning on this beaker, and then we all have our own water droplets. And so if we move up, then we can be really proud of ourselves, and then if we move down, we know that we can work on some stuff.
So I see a lot of droplets right now aren't up to the 3 yet. Is that okay?
It is fine. Everybody has to like grow and learn at their own pace.
Perfect.
So in terms of our promises of the standards-based system and this proficiency scale piece, I think you probably heard from the students that their own active engagement in their learning, really knowing the targets. And one of the things we know is having a really clear picture of that target is going to bring big gains in their learning, hopefully from the fact that they're engaged in wanting to do it, but also just being clear about the target. And that piece, I think, is really the significant difference maybe than what we've been doing in the past with standards, where we say, here are the standards, and of course everything I do in my classroom is aligned to the standards, but who knows that? And that's that shift again to that student so that they own that learning. And as you also probably were thinking is, boy, that took some time, right? I mean, you have to sit down, students have to know what those targets are. They have to understand those scales, and then that idea of where am I in the scale and how do I know? And so again, getting back to if we have this wide of a curriculum, we don't have that kind of time to really spend, to really dig into what are those different elements in that learning progression. And so really, again, just kind of that need to do this ELO process to come up with what are the most important things. And so what we're working on right now is really providing a data dashboard for students that they can monitor their own progress over time. So within any one course, of course, you can even do that on paper. But then over time, you want that history. And so what I showed as an example is from Orange Theory, where a lot of our gyms now, you wear a heart rate monitor, and they're instantly, every second telling you, would you work harder? And I think that's really the idea is, who is that data for? Like, nobody else cares how many sit-ups I can do, right? But I want to know. And so what is that that's going to compel students to keep going? That to have the data in front of them that will really keep them focused and wanting to improve. And then really, to be fair, our teachers too. I mean, they're working really hard to try to get everybody to the level that they want, and they want to see that progress. They want to see that over time, and they want to know how to use that data to help their students. And so some of the data we've had in the past is NDSA data and MAP data, and while that's helpful for some things, it isn't super helpful in the classroom, and our students don't really care about it. So this is data that they care about. This is their learning that they're doing every single day, or that I'm teaching every single day. And so really trying to measure those things that matter most to us. And then the idea of just, this is hard work. Let's just try to have things that kind of can help us stay motivated to keep at it. So what's next? We are really working hard to get our ELOs and proficiency scales, so the real definition of what should students know and be able to do, completed K through 12 with almost all of our courses by this summer. And then we'll continue some professional development and support with teachers around the use and application of proficiency scales. Our teacher leaders have done a lot of that. So far, in terms of the learning, we've provided some professional development, but not everyone has really had a lot of professional development on what those are and how to use them. And then once we have the proficiency scales constructed and all those ELOs selected, then in terms of the work, so that's got to be done district-wide. To have a guaranteed and viable curriculum, we need to agree, right, on what those things are. And then we can have more conversations at the building level around, now, how do I know they're proficient? You know, the students we're working with this week, how do we know who's proficient and not, and how are we going to help them? And so some of that work can now happen at the building level, because our challenge really has been to try to get to people together district-wide is really hard, just hard to find the time. And then we'll continue PD and support for our teachers around grading practices that align. So that if we are having students that take a little bit longer to learn it, or need to learn it in a different way, or show you that I know this in a different way, that we have grading practices aligned to that standards-based model. And so working with our teachers on that. And I love the cartoon that I found for this. You know, this idea of, this is kind of how it feels, honestly. I mean, I'm sure you're involved in a lot of this too, where you're making some progress, and then dang, I'm right back down at the bottom of the hill, or, I took a step back. And I feel like there's a lot of that. And that there's been a lot of, I feel like I reflect a lot on the progress, because I feel like sometimes it does take a long time. And people look at you like, seriously, we're still talking about standards? And yet, until we have a system where we really feel like, oh, most of our kids are hitting those grade level standards, and dang, they are coming to me knowing what I'd expect them to know. And those kinds of things, I feel like we're not there yet. And so that's going to take more capacity building in our folks, because again, and this isn't, we're not producing widgets here. This is hard work. And so really wanting to continue kind of just making sure everybody's with us as we're along for the ride. So I think that's what I've got for content. If you guys have questions.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have questions? Brandy?
Thank you very much for showing us this. This is very helpful. But I do have a question, and I think it basically probably pertains more to of the 6 through 12. As far as, like when an assignment is saying, you have this book report due on the 21st, is everybody held to pretty much that standard? Because I guess my biggest question is, if we can't hold them to like a date and say, oh no, you can turn it in another week later and another week later. It just seems like it's constant. Like when I went to school, if it wasn't due, you got a 0. You know what I mean? It just seems like to me like they get a few more chances. Well, when you go out into the workplace, you're not gonna get, your project is due on the 21st, it better be there type deal. So I was just kind of curious on how that works if everyone learns at a different.
Well, that's a really good question. And I would say I've worked with lots of contractors where it might not be true, actually, that it's due on the project date. So I'll just say, in the real world, that happens too, or deadlines slip. That aside, I mean, I feel like, we want students to learn those skills of responsibility, of course, right? That's a really important thing that they're learning in school. And those 21st century skills are chock full of stuff like that. I think what we're challenged with is we've got students who really get the academic part and then might be slacking off a little bit on some of those other skills. And how do you really report that in a way that both are visible? And so I think that's part of those standards-based grading practices that we'll be studying and learning about together is, that's not something we want to hide in a grade. We want that to be front and center. That this is, this student, mom and dad, while they are getting, they're proficient on everything, they've turned everything in late, or they're consistently tardy, or, those kinds of things. And I think as I've learned more about standards-based grading practices, actually some of those things become more visible than what they are now.
Thank you.
Robin?
To Brandy's point, it's hard for somebody old school like we are to understand this. So, I came to a new level of understanding when Rupak used the diaper analogy. I really enjoyed that, but I've never heard this explained so thoroughly and so well. So I feel like I'm at a new proficiency level understanding this too. So thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you.
John?
How many standards do we have or follow, or for what subjects?
So how many per course, or?
How many courses have standards? Does every course that's taught in Fargo Public Schools have a standard associated with it now?
Thank you. That's a good question. So I don't think every course would have state standards, although almost everyone does. I think one of the things we do look to is, what guiding document will help us if those state standards don't exist, or honestly, sometimes, and no fault of anyone's, but sometimes they're so old that you kind of have to look and say, is there anything newer than this out there? And so we've done a little bit of that too. But for the most part, I think we need some kind of a document to say, a body outside of ours said this is what's really important for this area. And so, but like I say, I'd have to look specifically, but I think in some of our areas like ILC, for instance, I'll use that as an example, there isn't a state course or content area for that kind of a course, yet they do have ELOs. And so we look to different documents. Sometimes it's even the 21st century skills when we're looking for some of those guiding documents.
Just follow. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot with that question.
It's okay.
So as we're going through this process and our teachers are learning the standards, I would imagine, especially with these ELOs, if I were the standards developer, I would want to know the feedback of, hey, your standard's not prioritized properly, or it has too much or too little in it. Are we learning things that we're giving feedback into the standards creation process?
Good question too. Well, standards creation and standards, well, I'll just say standards creation at the state level. So we have lots of our teachers who participate in that process. So they would certainly have an opportunity to give that feedback at that level. And I think that's mostly where, again, most of our guiding documents come from there. So as far as our feedback, that's probably what that would look like. And I think everybody would agree. I mean, if you've ever written standards, I mean, the people in the room love that content. So, I'm a science, I love science. And so there's nothing that I'm going to leave off the table, right? And so it's just, I feel like there's been lots of studies around it, but you'd have to be, 50 to be able to, 50 years old before you master all these standards to have that much time. So realistically, they're just never, those documents aren't designed to be able to teach all of it at the level of depth that the standard calls for.
Mr. Gandhi?
Yeah, and I would add on to that by saying I think some of that is already happening in the original system, but now we're just monitoring it differently. So just a couple of different terms I'll use since maybe the late 90s. We once used to call standards objectives, and they used to be power objectives, and then they went to vertically aligned standards. That's some of the work that we did even before ELOs. And what the vertically aligned standards did is it drew a connection between which standards will you see year after year that are vertically aligned all the way from 12 down to kindergarten, or what the case is, and then we'll draw tree maps. So some of that work kind of helped us identify which standards get absorbed into other standards. And then even kind of going back to the last piece, I think the most recent trend has kind of been looking at each standard and saying, okay, what level of either Bloom's taxonomy or a DOK rigor is each standard taught at? And then we understand from that, well, what does the output of that standard look like as well? So with the ELOs, we're not just going to go back to the original standards committee, because I would assume that as someone that's kind of been working with the state on cybersecurity standards, you want to know what got prioritized over something else when determining an ELO. We want to be cautious that we don't want to say we're dismissive of other standards. We just want to say that the ELOs reflect which other standards they encompass in, and we want to make sure that the ELOs are also encompassing all the skills that were written in the original standards. So it's not which standards were better than the other, but more which ones kind of summarize all the other standards as they loop up into it.
Christy?
Just want to say, when I visited my elementary school this fall, I had an opportunity to look at some proficiency scales, and the teacher was thrilled. You could see the pride that she had in where her students were early in the school year, and it was really fun to see that reflection. So thanks.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, lots of great examples of those being applied in classrooms.
Anyone else? Thank you very much. Our next presentation is on human resources, equitable resources, and planning monitoring. Mr. Gandhi, you are going to make the introduction.
Sure. So thank you, President Knudsen and board members. In alignment with the results of our strategic initiative 6 around human resources, which is equitable resources and planning and monitoring, we provide an annual report on our human resources department. So I am going to introduce Lori Feist, our Assistant Director of HR. But before Lori gets started, I just want to commend Lori and her team. As everyone knows, we've been going through a transition with the HR Director position, and our new HR Director will be starting on February 18th. Lori has done a wonderful job kind of making sure that her team keeps the functions of HR for our department going, putting this report together, along with several other tasks that kind of just fell on her place. Doing all that despite being a Cowboys fan and them not having the best football season. So I just want to thank her for all the work that she's been doing and her team as well during the transition.
Thank you. Good evening. I'll just highlight a few different areas from the report. Our HR department was busy this fall. We had about 85 new teachers that came into the district. And due to some retirements and promotions, there was an assistant principal hired, a dean of students, as well as several positive behavior interventionists. And then also a new position, which was the safety and emergency management coordinator. Quite a few of the new teachers that came in were first year, fresh out of college teachers, and it was fun to see the energy and joy that they're bringing into the school, since it's their first year. One of the accomplishments that I'm quite proud of this year is the collaboration that the HR team had after the contract was ratified. Our team had less than 5 work days to update, process, print, and distribute over 1,000 contracts before payroll was processed on the 11th. Whether it was travel pay, lane changes, overload contracts, department chair contracts, or any other miscellaneous contracts that we deal with, we had it all included in that first paycheck. At the same time all of that was going on, we also were updating all wages for the classified staff, adding new hires, as well as processing all retro pay for the hourly employees before their paychecks were processed on the 12th. Our dedicated staff was here after hours and on weekends to ensure that every employee of Fargo Public Schools was paid and paid correctly. Our HR team processed 3,620 W-2s for the calendar year 2018. And our goal for the second year in a row is to process the 1095-C forms and have them go out with the W-2 forms. There was 1,900 plus ACA forms that will be combined this year and sent out. And the reason we do that is it saves the district money by combining the two, because we only pay postage once, we don't pay double envelopes, and then of course our time. We did make one change to our HR staff this year, and we added Susan Fox, our receptionist. She's a great asset to our team. If you haven't met her, I encourage you to stop upstairs and meet her. And then beginning next week, Fargo Public Schools will offer training for our substitute teachers and our substitute paraprofessionals. And then we have there's additional training scheduled during the next few months. And examples of the training topics include FPS technology, teaching and learning, and classroom management. Also new this year is student teachers that have a sub-teach license are now allowed to be paid while substitute teaching and earning their hours for school at the same time. So they can actually do both at the same time. Before they had to do one or the other. Now they get to combine them. So that's a plus for us and a plus for them. Due to the work of Jodelle, I don't want to take credit for anything that she did, if she's still here. FBS has entered into a partnership with Valley City State University Education Department. 8 days each semester, Valley City State University students come into our classrooms to sub while our teachers are attending professional development. Fargo Public Schools employees separating from employment are asked to complete an exit survey. The survey responses provide valuable feedback that is used to identify areas of strength, areas of improvement, and learning opportunities within our schools. Employees that voluntarily resign will be provided an opportunity to complete a confidential online exit survey, and then the employees that retire with the district are provided an opportunity to engage in a face-to-face exit interview with a member of the cabinet. Findings of the most recent surveys indicate that the majority of former employees feel positively about their employment experience with Fargo Public Schools. Our online participation percentage rate is quite low, so going forward, we may need to review our strategy to increase participation. And as we start the descent towards the end of the school year, we're looking at our recruitment needs. Our very own HR generalist, Lisa Olson, is going to be retiring after over 30 years in the district. So we're going to have a spot open in our HR department. We have to date received 25 certified staff retirements and 5 classified staff retirements notifications. We have 1 elementary principal retiring. In addition to the standard recruiting tools that we have been using, such as the FPS website, job service, and the forum, we are continuing to use Diversity Jobs in 2018. Diversity Jobs is a search engine for a wider audience of minority groups. Lastly, the entire group is excited and ready to move forward with the addition of our new HR director. Anybody have any questions?
Questions? Thank you very much for the report. Robin and then John.
So on the last page, you talk about HR noteworthy facts, and you talk about substitute teachers. How is the pool now for substitute teachers? Was that an issue?
Yeah, it's about the same as it's consistently been the last couple of years.
Okay. And then the hard-to-fill positions are not for the subs, they're for the full-time kindergarten, music, art, and special ed?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
John.
I just wanted to say kudos again for the job you did following the contract ratification. You said you were going to get it done, and you absolutely did. And I knew it was a huge, huge task, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you very much. Nice job. Superintendent's report, Mr. Gandhi.
Sure. So just a couple of quick things. I think at the last board meeting during one of the legislative updates, we had talked about a legislative bill that's going to change just the language of Power School in one of the bills to student information systems. And I think since that report, and we just got in general some questions about is Power School going away. So just wanted to announce that Power School is not going away. Power School is here to stay. We do have several parents and staff members that were inquiring about that. The bill just changes the language, so we're not identifying any one system by name in our legislation. So it'll say student information system moving forward in case anything were to ever change down the road. But as of now, there is no intent for any change to Power School. Lori mentioned this as well at our January meeting. We accepted a retirement for one of our elementary principals. So we are looking for a principal at Centennial Elementary School. To date, we've already have several candidates that have applied to that position. It's going to be open for a couple of weeks. But we really look forward to working with the staff at Centennial Elementary School to collect and identify what attributes do we want in the principal there, and then involve them in that process to make sure that we're finding the right leader for that campus. Lastly, I just wanted to end on a high note. This was a long weekend for students because we had Monday off. I came back to my office and I had a thank you card from a parent, and I'm not going to read it in the interest of time, but you'll just see how long it is. But Principal Brad Larson at Carl Ben Allison, I think, has started an initiative with all of his staffs on when we reach out to parents, we need to reach out to parents not just about negative phone calls, but how many positive interactions that we can have as well. And this was a parent that wrote a thank you card specifically about one of our teachers, Mr. Klein, that called the parent just to say that as the semester ends near, your child's on the borderline of a B or an A, and I just want to encourage her to keep working hard and do well. And the parent was just so blown away by getting a phone call that wasn't negative from the school that they wrote a thank you card to the superintendent, and I thought that was worth sharing. So the teacher and the principal will get a copy of the card, and we'll get the card itself, but worth noting.
Thank you. So you took care of your superintendent's report and the legislative update all in one, is that right?
Part of the legislative update. I'll leave the rest to Robin.
He's a high achiever. Mhm. Okay, on to the consent agenda. Is there a motion for approval? There's a motion for approval, a second?
Second.
All right, there's been a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying yes.
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 Motion passes. All right, we have a very short business agenda, and that is that there is nothing listed there currently. So we're going to move right on to board reports. Let's start with, it'll be committee liaison and correspondence reports. Robin, would you like to start?
Sure, thank you. I'll end with governmental affairs. City PTA Council met today for planning. Our next citywide meeting is February 20th. I know Missy has some things she wants to share with the parent body. Also expecting the spring PTA luncheon to be May 15th, pending when she secures the site. I was at Fargo Cast Public Health on January 15th, and I attended the People Project overview about emotionally healthy workplaces and self-care. West Fargo Public Schools is partaking in this, as were several businesses across town, about how to employee satisfaction, engagement, retention, and then also the personal emotional self-care. So that was pretty enlightening as well. As far as Governmental Affairs Committee, I was, as I mentioned, in Bismarck on January 11th working on early childhood advocacy. I also handed out save the date flyers to all of our legislators that I ran into for our pre-crossover breakfast. Heard a lot of background stuff too. I'll fill you in on some of my bill reports. The next GAC meeting is February 12th, and that is a Tuesday, the first school board meeting in February. We'll be planning our crossover breakfast at that meeting. As you know, the 19th is the breakfast in Bismarck. I was just mentioning to John prior to the board starting, a legislator from Grand Forks posted on Facebook that there's over 900 bills right now submitted in this session. Some of the records that I've heard before were only in the 500s. So people are busy. Bill submission deadlines, last week it was for the House, yesterday it was for the Senate, so those are for the full bills. They can still submit some resolutions, but the bulk of them should be in there now, thank goodness, because it's getting crazy. Bills to watch, the on-time funding bill, since that was one of our legislative priorities, is not promising to pass. I learned that when I was out in Bismarck, and that's continuing to be echoed across the state. They feel that it would really pick winners and losers and hurt some of the declining districts. So unfortunately, I don't think we're going to be talking about that one at crossover. I sent you some information today about a bill that was flying under the radar. What I was told, and I haven't updated RUPAC yet, is a legislator submitted that bill for a constituent who he didn't want to say no to. Take that for what it's worth. This, and I share that only because this is how some of the bills come to the surface. You updated on the Power School thing. There's a little bit of drama and politics behind that too, but I think you explained that very well. There are several funding bills Jackie is working on, specifically House Bill 1182 and House Bill 1380. A lot of them are limiting our taxing authority. One in particular would only allow us to increase the dollars that we levy by 3%. And if we ever exceed that, we would have to go to voters annually for approval. So I don't know how many more elections you guys want to work on, but so there are a lot that are limiting our taxing authority, and Jackie's loaned her expertise on that. We talked a little bit about the gun bills. A couple of pieces that I think we need to remember, not only is it student and staff safety, but we need to talk about insurance liability costs. That's a piece that is oftentimes forgotten. And so I don't know how NDERF works, but if we're covered by insurance, and we would obviously by NDERF, a lot of our premiums would be affected and affect a lot of other organizations that work within our schools. So from a money aspect, that's one point that we need to talk about. Also with gun bills, we tend to stay more neutral on some of the sentinel bills that the rural districts might benefit from. We're in a unique position because we have emergency services so close. So out of respect for their needs, I think we'll probably, in the past, we've stayed pretty neutral, but we hit the 18-year-old gun-toting bill pretty hard because that affects our district, and our school district would not be able to not allow them. I want to talk a little bit about House Bill 1208, the $200 educator reimbursement for school supplies, which sounds like a great idea on the surface. Some of the concerns with that bill is the definition of educator. $200, there's a $500 fiscal note on this. There's at least a $2 million cost just to cover just the regular full-time teachers. That doesn't talk about special ed. That doesn't talk about all the specialists. So I don't know what's going to happen to that bill or if amendments are being offered. But I want everybody to know that I don't think we'd be opposed to teachers getting reimbursed, but it's a little bit more sticky than what it sounds on the surface. And that's a popular bill in the community. So just want to give you some background on that. Other than that, guys, we're just continuing to watch these bills. We're tracking about 172. Joe Lynn created the tracker, Joe Lynn and Jackie, I assume. You did, thank you. And so as soon as we finalize it, because we just went over it yesterday, we'll try to get it out to you guys with the share stuff, and we'll continue to update it as well. But it's been a wild ride already. Rupak commented on, this does move fast. So I think that's all I got. Sorry for the long report.
Oh, it's a good report. Thank you. Very thorough. Does anyone have questions for Robin? Okay. John?
Thank you. Negotiations. Please watch your inboxes for potential committee dates and times coming out, probably tomorrow. I'll be attending the North Dakota School Board Association Negotiations Seminar, 7th and 8th of February. That's coming right up here. Who else is attending that? Just curious. Do you, Jim, Jennifer? Okay. Thank you. And then on the 11th of February, Monday, is our next scheduled session with the FEA. On the agenda, we'll be exchanging our topics for negotiation and maybe a work session, and that is at 4:30 here on the 11th. That's my update. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Jennifer?
So Communications Committee met. We invited the new district's new safety emergency and management coordinator, Mackenzie McCormick, to join the meeting that day to share a little bit about what she's been working on and what her responsibilities include, and it was a very long list. Clearly a much needed position. So we are very grateful that she could join us and share that. She as well shared some goals for the future and some of the programs and trainings that are currently happening within our buildings. Lastly, she did also a great job of answering our follow-up questions from the NDSBA reports. So it was nice to have that discussion as well. Our next meeting will include the State of the Schools follow-up information and discussion, as well as the Aspen Group recommendation follow-up. And that meeting is going to be scheduled, we had to move it to a week earlier due to President's Day. So it will be February 11th at noon. That's it.
Thank you, Jennifer. David?
Nothing at this time.
Jim?
Just a couple of short things. The Pre-K-12 Education Visioning Steering Committee met on January 14th, received the initial report from the Behavioral Health Summit, also received the final report of the Innovation Education Task Force, and each of the entities involved in the steering committee have been asked to think about what their organization has the capacity to do and a plan to do to address the achievement gap, specifically for Native Americans and low-income students. And I think the next meeting of that group is scheduled for, I want to say, May 15th. We backed it up to let the legislative session get finished, so if there's any curveballs, knuckleballs, or beaned batters out of that process were prepared to deal with them. Community Development Committee met. I was not able to be at that meeting, but they did discuss the process for future grant decisions, really figuring out how are we going to evaluate well-established organizations versus, for lack of a better term, kind of startup organizations that may not survive but certainly need some money to actually learn how to walk. So that'll be an ongoing discussion. We also had a brief discussion. There are some committees, commissions, they come with different names that the city has established that have actually been getting funded out of the community development funds as opposed to the general fund. Native American Commission got shifted to the general fund last year. I think the Fargo Youth Commission is still coming through in part out of the community development funds. And at least the person who is chairing this committee and as a city commissioner is pretty convinced those things should be in the general fund. And they shouldn't be tapping into the grant dollars that we have for ongoing, permanent, standing bodies that the city would like to have in place. So that ultimately is a decision of the city commission, so we'll see where that goes. And last but not least, I will be maybe getting on an airplane to go to DC on Thursday for the Policy and Resolutions Committee work. That's it.
Thank you, Jim. Christy?
Just the planning committee meeting was postponed from February 1st to February 6th. Jackie and Jolyn were both out of town, and so we moved it back a bit.
Brandy?
I also attended the Communications Committee meeting as well, and then last Sunday, the Fargo Youth Initiative continued their planning session. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Brian?
Well, I attended the State of the Schools on the 10th, and thanks Anne Marie for organizing us, and it was fun leading the group discussions and things to get the ideas of parents and things like that. We had the communications meeting on the 14th that I attended, and it is a very long list. It went overboard, and it wasn't because of me talking. You know, and thanks for following all the legislation. You know, as I sit back and I follow it at home as well. 31 years in education, and this is my 16th legislative session. Either I'm getting old, or there's a lot of weird bills that come about now than when they used to in, say, 1989 when I started. It's like, really? We're going to talk about this? Hard to understand, but we do need to keep following, and as I've always been told that when I was a superintendent, that board members had a lot more power than superintendents. But then I hear, no, it's really, we got to engage our people, our constituents, to get out and contact these legislators and tell them if it's a good idea or a bad idea. So it's definitely interesting. That's it.
Well, thank you. The day that we had the State of the Schools event, it was kind of the state of everything. We had the State of the Cities event earlier in the morning, and a lot of us board members were there, and then followed that with the State of the Schools event, and nice to see support from our city in terms of the mayor being there and a couple of park board folks, so that was wonderful. And then, of course, the task force, or excuse me, the focus group time, so thanks for everyone that participated there. GAC meets Thursday at 7:30 a.m. this Thursday. Excuse me, I wrote GAC, but I did mean governance, yes. Although, Robin, are you ready for, you didn't know that? Governance meets Thursday at 7:30 a.m. And our next board meeting is February 12th. We have a work session following that meeting, just as a reminder that we will all be staying a little bit later that evening to address some of the items that we normally would handle on a separate date, but we've decided we're going to work together and hang out a little bit longer that evening. I did also attend Communications Committee meeting. The Native American Commission meeting is February 7th. That will be that commission's next meeting. I did want to give a shout out to, at least this is the first name of the student, Fargo Public Schools, Haley, from the student that organized the milk run many years ago for, to help raise money for the Got No Milk program. We've heard about that program previously, but I did attend the event last night for Martin Luther King Jr. celebration, and I know normally we wouldn't talk about some of these other activities that we attend in our community, but a student of Fargo Public Schools was recognized at that event, so I think it's appropriate for us to recognize that the work that person has done in our community, and how very evident that young individuals can have a huge impact. So congratulations to Haley on that. I don't have anything else on my report. Anne Marie, I think, is going to follow up with an email for the president's report to all of us, so look for that. And is there any other business that needs to be taken care of? John?
President Knudsen, I would move we enter executive session for the purpose of negotiation strategy as permitted under North Dakota Century Code, Section 44-04-19.1.
And is there a second?
Second.
All right, there's a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying yes.
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 All right, thank you. We will clear the room at 6:30 PM. So board members and administration and Anne Marie will be able to remain. Thank you. in regular session. It is 6:42 p.m. 6:42 p.m. We're back in regular session. Is there any other business before the board? There's no other business, then I will adjourn. Our next meeting date is February 12th, and it is 6:42 p.m. Thank you.